Hey, everybody. I just had a popsicle, and it was a really good popsicle. You can do it! Come on, Spike. We believe in you. Give me an S. Give me a P. Give me an I. Take a deep breath and go. Spike took a deep breath and gazed over Sweet Apple Acres, transformed fallow fields with a sick, sinking feeling. The obstacle course seemed to leer back at him. I know you can do this, Spike, Twilight's voice called. He let his eyes wander over the various tasks. He had to make his way around the course of barrels without knocking over a single one, and they seemed horribly close together, in his opinion. He had to sort a mixed crate of apples, eggs, and new season's peaches without bruising or crushing them. He had to hit 3 successive targets with his fire, each progressively further away, and all of varying sizes. There was an old plow that he had to melt with his very hottest flame. He had to lift a dismayingly hard rock and carry it for what seemed a truly sadistic distance, all the way up to the barn. Finally, there was a balloon attached to the very top of the barn's apple-surmounted weathercock, higher than he could reach on hind legs. He had to fly up there and get it. Fat chance. Your faith in me is much appreciated and completely misplaced, he hollered back at Twilight, his eyes glued to the torture track before him. Oh, come on, Spike, this is a total cinch, Rainbow Dash yelled impatiently. Give it your best shot, kiddo, Applejack called. Remember, it's just a test. I can't believe Twilight just said that, he muttered to Big Macintosh. Oh, no, he muttered to Big Macintosh. I can't believe Twilight just said that, he muttered to Big Macintosh. Would you just get yourself out there already? Macintosh drawled. You done most of this in your lessons after all. Not flying, I haven't. Yeah, but not all at once, and not with an audience. Spike glanced back to where his friends were standing. A small crowd of Ponyvillians. Ponyvillians! It's funny because it looks like Ponyvillains. Okay. And press had also gathered there. Cameras were already held at half-mast. Applebloom had brought out the apple stall and was doing a little brisk trade. He was now sullenly accepting the trail of photographers and reporters that followed him wherever he went. It was a real pain in the tail, though, when the sound of cameras clicking from the lakeside interrupted his bath time. He resigned himself to being the curiosity of this week, perhaps of this year. It was intrusive and humiliating, but there wasn't much he could do about it until his house was built. Even then he was sure they'd stake out at his door. He'd never thought he was all that interesting to watch, even when trying to complete an obstacle course. He would have loved to be a spectator himself, or perhaps the commentator. He liked being the commentator. With a twinge, he remembered doing the announcing for the running of the leaves with Pinkie Pie. As spotlights went, that was one he'd rather enjoyed. This one stunk. His friends were cheering enthusiastically amongst the smattering of other ponies. Rainbow Dash looked impatient to try the course herself, and Fluttershy appeared almost as nervous as he was. Rarity was demurely holding a pair of opera glasses to her lovely eyes, and Applejack was biting the rim of her Stetson. Pinkie was wearing a rather mad purple and green hat that sprouted wings on either side, and a tail trailing down in the back. He blinked. He was a hat now? He raised a perplexed eyebrow at her, before chalking it up to another of the mysteries of Pinkie Pie. Twilight was smiling at him. Go on, she mouthed. He took another deep breath, shook out his tense shoulders, and nodded once. Okay, then, Macintosh said, in his slow, deep way. When I kick this bell, give it your best shot. Ready? No, Spike grunted through his clenched teeth, staring at the barrels before him. Too bad, Macintosh said cheerfully, and his powerful hind legs kicked the bell clear off the post. Spike resisted the urge to run. He swallowed once, and then began to carefully navigate the barrels as slowly as he could. Controlling the length of his tail had proved to be a real challenge. But he unfolded and curled it around the obstacles as delicately as he could. In 1 or 2 places the barrels were so close together that he reflexively held his breath in a futile attempt to make him skinnier. He inched through, step by cautious step, his wings held high out of the way. It was with a huge sigh that he finished the barrel weave. Go, Spike! Pinkie Pie screeched, and he winced. Thanks, Pinkie Pie, he called back, but I'm not done yet. I know. She shrugged, calling over the cheers of his other friends. "But that was just in case you needed a little extra oomphin'." "Oomphin'?" he repeated to himself, and then shook his head. Refocusing on the crate in front of him, he wilted, "Eggs and peaches? Now that's just being mean." He shot back at Macintosh. The red farm pony looked smug. "Yup." 3 empty crates stood beyond the mixed one, waiting to be filled. Spike bit his lip unthinkingly, and then unbit it hurriedly. Geesh, fangs! When would he learn? He pushed the 3 crates closer to the mixed one, and looking challengingly back at Macintosh. "Never said I couldn't," he said defiantly. "Suppose I never did," Macintosh agreed, his expression sour. The reduced distance meant that Spike wouldn't have to carry the foodstuff to its crate. Still, picking up uncooked eggs ends in dragon claws was tough enough, in Spike's opinion. He set himself to the task, his claws flickering with practice ease over the apples. He trembled over the peaches and moved at a glacial pace around the eggs. He forced himself to breathe once the spots began to dance in front of his eyes. Sweat began to run down his neck. A hush had settled over the watching ponies. Every time he picked up an apple, they leaned forward. It was a peach. The intake of breath was audible. If it was an egg, you could have heard a pin drop in Canterlot. By the time he was nearing the bottom of the crate, his brow was pouring with sweat. There was a further surprise for him, however. The lowest layer wasn't filled with eggs. It was filled with tiny cups that were in turn brimful of water. Oh, God. He shot a glower. Is it a glower? He shot a glower at Macintosh, who crossed his front hooves complacently. "That'll learn you to move things around," he was told. Spike growled under his breath, and tried to pinch the first tiny little cup between his claws without spilling a drop. Water splashed over his thumb claw, and he hissed in frustration. Carefully setting the cup down on the combed earth beside him, he steeled himself once more, and set about the rest. Finally, the crate was empty. Oh, that was quick. And he wanted to collapse in a pile right then and there. The water had spilled twice more, but he had given up being irritated at Macintosh, or even at himself. "Just get it over with," his internal monologue chanted, as he backed cautiously away from the wobbling water cups and turned to the next challenge. There was a line drawn in white paint on the ground, and Spike dutifully stood himself behind it. Squinting at his first target, he took a controlled breath and opened his mouth. The blast of flame was tightly concealed and very short. The bucket resting over the top of the first closest pole rattled under the blast, the side charring black. To the sound of cheers, he looked back triumphantly at Fluttershy and Applejack. The first was stock still in anticipation. Peeking out from underneath her pink mane, the second had left off biting her hat and was now biting her hooves. The second pole was further away, and the target wasn't a bucket. It was an apple, and he realized he had to roast it. That meant tempering his flame over a distance. Squaring his shoulders, he eyed it sternly. "No apple's gonna get the better of me," he told it sternly, and released his fire. The red skin blushed darker, and began to wrinkle under the soft, gentle flame that flickered over its surface. He continued blowing the thin stream of his mildest fire over the apple, until it had shriveled and wrinkled up completely. He stopped, panting. That sort of thing required far more control and finesse than anything big and showy. The last pole was a distressing distance away, and the target was the smallest yet. A little wisp of hay was tied to the tip of the pole. He looked back at Fluttershy in alarm, and she gave him an encouraging little nod before ducking back under her mane. Applejack was now gnawing her foreleg. The silence was so thick you could walk on it. I like that description. He gulped and turned back. The hay had been dipped in red paint, and he realized that he was meant to singe it off without burning the rest. How does that even work? "My friends are all evil, diabolical geniuses of the first degree," he breathed in dismay. He'd never tried anything along these lines. That much control over his fire was never something he'd expected to have. Still, nothing ventured, nothing gained, he supposed. Taking a shallow breath, he screwed up his nerve and gave the tiny tuft a diamond drill stare, and fired. To his amazement, the trickle of flame that curled from his jaws unfolded easily and elegantly over the stretch of ground to delicately flick the hay-tip gently. A little hiss told him that the wet paint had been burned, but the rest of the stalk did not blacken and char. It didn't even twitch. He didn't bother closing his mouth as the fire died away, but stared stupidly at his achievement, slack-jawed. "You did it! You did it!" Fluttershy yelled wildly. I'm sorry, that was a terrible Fluttershy voice. And Spike was startled out of his stupor by the uncharacteristic sight of the shy pony hugging Applejack around the neck and jumping up and down. "I did it," he said blankly, still staring at the hay, before turning to his jubilant friends. "Hey, I did it!" They hollered and whooped back at him, and quite a few of the other spectators did as well. He beamed at them all, flushed with his victory and happiness. "Well, Spike, but you ain't done yet." "Oh, well done, Spike, but you ain't done yet," Macintosh reminded him quietly. "So what's next?" Spike turned back, still smiling. "It can't be harder than—" "Oh." The old plow was suspended in the air in a blacksmithing vise. Underneath it, a mold sat waiting for the melted metal. It would require the absolute hottest flame he could produce, and the tightest focus. That horrible, horrible word, focus. He immediately straightened, jerking his head to Macintosh to step back out of the way once more. A hush fell over the little crowd as they gathered the nature of the challenge. There was some whispering amongst them as they debated the use of a dragon in blacksmithing, or on a more regular basis. He had produced that green-white flame several times since that first lesson, but he'd always had Fluttershy coaching him through it. This time he was on his own. Lengthening his neck, he drew in the very largest breath he could, his sides expanding with its volume. For good measure, he took in a little more. His wings half unfurled, and his shoulder blades slid apart as his rib cage expanded, and he began to tremble from containing such an amount of air. Then, with a tearing, crackling roar, he sent it barreling along the roof of his mouth, along his hard palate, through his tightly pursed jaws, and into the cracked old metal. It wasn't white green, or even normal green. With a start, Spike realized he'd stumbled upon yet another new sort of fire. This flame was so hot he couldn't even see it through his watering eyes. The old plow pinged and crackled and began to glow red-hot within seconds. Only a few moments later did the plink of liquid sound in the in the trough. I don't know, it's like rough, but it has a T in front of it. In the trough of the mold beneath. And mold is spelled with a U. M-O-U-L-D. Oh, God. Weird words. Weird words. His heart leapt inside him, and he redoubled his efforts. Through blurred vision, he could make out the plow's shape softening and running like butter in a saucepan. His mighty breath stuttered to its close, and he dragged in another. Without pausing, he sent the superheated flame screaming at the lump suspended above the mold. His whole skull was buzzing like a hive from the force of the fire pouring from his mouth. A clunk signaled that the lump had grown too small to be held by the vise and had fallen into the mold. He took another large gulp of air, and he aimed carefully at the bobbing red-hot island in the sea of silver. Once more he roared that invisible, furious flame. The lump bobbed a few more times, shrinking like an ice cube in summer, before he could no longer make it out at all. He sucked air into starved lungs and prepared to do it again, his eyes now flooded with boiling tears as he reared his neck into position. A touch against his side made him stop. "I think you might have done it, Spike," Macintosh said. "I did?" he said hoarsely, his head swinging back blindly. The pony was a red blur beside him. Filled that more neater than pie in a pie crust," he said. And there was another. Oh, that was big. Filled. How do you pronounce mold? I know that sounds weird, but with a U. "Filled that mold neater than pie in a pie crust," he said, and there was pride in his voice. "I did?" Spike repeated, voice gravelly, and rubbed his forepaw against his stinging eyes. When he looked back, the mold was filled to the brim with gently rippling silver, and he blinked a few times. "Wow! Sweet!" There was silence from the crowd. Did they not like that? Spike croaked. I think it was a bit more than they was willing to handle, McIntosh said dryly. That last fire of yours is the mightiest scariest thing. Oh. Cheer up now. You're almost done. McIntosh nudged his side before squinting. Also, you're sounding sort of hoarse. Need a drink? Huh, do I ever! Spike sank to the ground, and as Scootaloo ran forward, a tub filled with water on her back. Spike gave her a grateful smile, and then practically lunged for it, grabbing it in one paw and tossing the water down his throat. The hiss when it touched his mouth was very loud, and he sighed in relief from amongst billowing clouds of steam. Oh, that is so much better. Ow. You all right? Scootaloo asked. Hey, that was awesome! The way you got that haystack? Amazing! Thanks, Scoot, he said tiredly, but I gotta finish. You look kind of rough, Spike, she said doubtfully, as he struggled up again and eyed the rock he had to carry up to the barn. Can't stop halfway through, he said. I'm fine. If you say so, she said, picking up the tub and moving back. Right, he croaked, and then cleared his throat again. Right, he said again, glaring at the rock. It was larger than Tom. It was larger than the basalt blocks he'd been carting for his house. He wondered how they'd gotten into the field at all. It took 20 ponies, McIntosh answered, the unspoken question in a murmur. And I'm supposed to lift it all on my own, he muttered back. If you're going to hurt yourself in any way, best to stop now, McIntosh said, but Spike shook his head. I can't stop halfway through, he said to himself, and ducked his neck against the rock, bracing his back and rolling it down into the hollow between his wings. His eyes bugged out immediately, and his knees trembled. He choked, breath stolen away. You're gonna do yourself a mischief, McIntosh said worriedly. Should have known it was too heavy. Put her down, Spike. But Spike was taking a step, and then another. His legs wobbled like wet noodles, but he strained onwards. The stubbornness he's always possessed, and had always thrown into childish things, was now in full control. And by Celestia and Luna and everything good, he was going to get that stupid rock up to that stupid barn! No matter what! He grunted through his gritted fangs and took another step, another, stronger step. McIntosh's protests fell, silent, and he began to keep pace with Spike. The soft sounds of hooves in loam told him that his audience was also following. Under the dizzying weight, he vaguely wondered how sweaty and violet his face was. No doubt he looked truly ridiculous. He watched the ground passing underneath his claws. It seemed to move tortuously slow. Under the crushing weight of the giant rock, he puffed and panted and hauled one foot in front of the other, his claws dragging against the soft earth. His throat still burned, and his back felt as though it was being pulverized. He shook that thought away, and took another step, and then another. Not far now, Twilight's voice whispered from behind him. He looked up. Though his eyes were a little sore and stinging, he could see the large red shape of the barn closer than he had imagined. He took another step, his pace quickening as the finish neared. His neck straightened, and he staggered onwards, tail stiff with tension, up to the barn's side, and allowed the massive rock to slide off his back. It landed with a dull boom, and rolled a little distance before rocking to a standstill. Spike huffed smoke through his nostrils, at it contemptuously, before careening to the ground in a pile of purple scales. "What is it with you and showing rocks who's boss?" Rainbow Dash's voice asked, and he made a husky noise of irritation. "I'd say it was more of a case of not being beaten," Twilight said, proud and fond and worried all at once. "Spike, are you okay? Have you hurt yourself?" He managed, and slumped over some more. "You look like you were beaten up by you look like a beaten-up suitcase," Rainbow Dash said. "Real nice," Applejack said tartly. "I call him how I sees him." "You are not attempting to fly in this condition," Twilight said. "I gotta finish," he rasped, hauling himself upwards. "Spike, But Twilight didn't get to complete herself before his wings extended and swept into the all-important downbeat. His mind flickered back to Razorfang, and he tried to emulate the giant dragon's moments the previous day. His tired legs pushed away from the ground, and he beat once, twice. "I'm doing it," he thought, incredulously and joyously. "I'm—" Thump! He landed heavily on his hindquarters, agony racing up his spine. He screeched and crumpled on the spot, a jumbled heap of wings, limbs, and pain. "Oh, you silly dragon!" Twilight gasped, racing towards him. He turned his ringing head to her. Stars were winking in and out of existence before his eyes. "Sorry, Twi. What possessed you to try and fly in a state like this?" Twilight demanded, in a rushed voice, her hooves running over him, checking for damage. She sagged in relief when she found no injuries, and continued in a lower tone. "You should have listened to me, Mr. Stubborn." He was too beaten to even protest the name. He made a mumbled noise of apology, and drooped even further into his untidy jumble of purple aches and pains. "Spike, it was just a test," Rainbow Dash spoke up once more. "Just a way of seeing where you were at with everything, and pushing the boundaries a bit. You didn't have to finish it all, you big idiot, and you sure didn't have to try and fly." "I can't anyway," Spike mumbled. "You can," Dash insisted automatically. "We just haven't found the right exercise for you yet." "The ground and I," Spike slurred, "have a very special relationship." "Well, now we know he's perfectly fine," Rarity commented, "if he's making dreadful jokes like that." "Rarity?" He raised his head and smiled unsteadily in the direction her voice came from. "Did you see me, lifting that rock, and my fire? I did good fire." "You certainly did, dear." "Spilled the water, can't fly, but I did real good fire. Didn't knob a berry, either. Not a balloon. Knock a barrel." "We should get him home," Twilight sighed. "Home," he agreed wholeheartedly. He felt like he'd been wrung out like a dishcloth. "How?" Rainbow Dash asked, eyeing his prone bulk with skepticism. Spike himself answered by slowly creaking, dragging himself to his feet with a gigantic groan. Then he appeared to sag on the spot. "Ow!" he said pathetically. "Oh, poor Spike," Fluttershy said, her tone sympathetic. "I'll heat up some towels for you, and we can put them over your shoulders when we reach the square. How does that sound?" "Heavenly," he croaked. "How do you manage to have a competitive side when there's no competition?" Twilight asked. "Natural talent?" Spike replied, with a wobbly grin. So I just spent the last half hour recording the next part of this chapter, and it just got lost, and I don't know why, but the microphone stopped working, and I lost half of it. It was good. I liked it. There's some nice moments with Twilight sparkling him, but I'll have to do that later, so I guess I'll do 2 parts of this chapter. But in the meantime, I would really like to know, is the big fight between Razorfang and Spike going to happen at the end of the book, like at chapter 15, or at chapter 12 and 13, and then the aftermath of that is the big climax of the fic, not book, fic. So if anyone knows that, because I think that some of you already have read the whole story, but still listen to this, which is awesome. Thanks for doing that. If any of you could answer that, that would be awesome, because I really want to know. Because, yeah. Okay, bye-bye. Half an hour!